who wrote the first 5 books of the Bible, often called the Pentateuch? I think this is going to be a really fun video for those of you who enjoy scholarship and intellectualism and that kind of stuff. So stick around if you enjoy that stuff. So until the European Enlightenment, virtually every single Christian and Jew and otherwise believed that Moses wrote the Pentateuch. And even today, most average Christians believe that Moses wrote the Pentateuch because it doesn't actually name an author in the Pentateuch, the first 5 books. Moses never said, hey, I wrote this. But Jesus in the New Testament says that Moses wrote it. So that is why most Christians would say that Moses wrote it no matter what scholarship says. So what do scholars say? So the main thing that scholars believe is the theory called the JEDP theory. And it's ironic that people claim that Christians believe in things blindly. They have blind faith. They have no evidence whatsoever. When this theory, and I'm not saying this theory is completely impossible, but the theory is that everything was written down by different people and combined into the first 5 books. And so that's, the J actually stands for Jehovah, and that was how they identified God. And one of the guys identified God, another one identified God as Elohim in the Hebrew. And so they combine these two, J-E, and then D, and then P, and then P is the priestly, D is the Deuteronomy. And so all these were put together, and there's also more letters. There's an argument between whether it's fragments or whether it's full authors, that kind of stuff. The main issue with this is that there is no physical evidence whatsoever. So because these scholars believe that they were compiled to about 2,500 years ago, really right before the coming of Jesus, about 500 years, in that time period is when all this was combined, there is not a single copy of a copy of a copy of a copy. We don't have any writing whatsoever that these people claim that were written before the Bible so the Bible can be compiled. Furthermore, there is not a single person in history, in antiquity, that said anything about these being combined, that said anything about these other books. And that in history, it was very common for people to list other books because there were just not that many around. And so when people would say, hey, here's the one book about this, thing. So it's kind of ironic that we are told to have blind faith when this is, most scholars believe this, most biblical scholars believe the JEDP, yet there is no physical evidence whatsoever. And the consensus on it has completely broken down. There is really no consensus as to who wrote what, when the dates are. I mean, there is a huge argument among all of this. Basically, most scholars believe that JEDP exists, but some believe that the P doesn't exist. Some don't understand the date for J. That there's a slew of huge issues with the scholarship behind it. We just simply don't know when it happened. So I'm not saying this theory is impossible, but when I was in school, I just finished in 2020. I have a Master of Divinity. When I was in school, I would, you look up these scholars and they would say that this is the only theory that makes any sense. And it's like, okay, what about Moses just simply having written it himself and using different titles for God, such as Yahweh and Elohim as different titles? Yahweh means like God most powerful, like the most powerful God, and Elohim is like a more personal title for God. So it just means that he's more personal. So, I mean, I use titles for God in my prayers. When I write, I use different titles for God. Sometimes I call him Lord, sometimes I call him God, sometimes I call him Father. Those all mean different things to me. Father is more personal, obviously, and God usually shows the majesty of God, right? And so that's what the Jews and the Christians argue. Why can't it simply be different titles? But they put forth this theory and they say, if you don't believe this theory, you're an idiot. And it's like, okay, you have no physical evidence whatsoever. You can say that it's a theory and that it's possible this happened, but to say that there's no other thing possible is really frustrating, because this is supposed to be scholarship, right? You're supposed to lead what has the most evidence. Christians and Jews say he simply used a different title for God, and that he wrote it all, and he wrote it over many years, so his style of writing changed. My style of writing changed. Obviously, I was getting an education, but my style of writing has changed so much since I was in high school, it's not even comparable to each other. You know what I mean? So that's what Christians and Jews say, but biblical scholars will say, well, you guys are idiots. And it's just not fair, because there is so little evidence. And when you take Philosophy 101, when you take Logic 101, you learn that an argument from silence is the worst argument there is, because there's no evidence, obviously. So to put forth the theory and say this is the only theory that makes any sense, if you believe anything else, you're an idiot, and yet have no physical evidence, is just really frustrating for me. And a lot of people who are Christians, a lot of biblical scholars who are Christian, because we get made out to be these idiots, but there's no evidence physically whatsoever. So